If God made us in his image and likeness, but it's what is already in us, what is within us that comes out, that defiles us, how did it get in there in the first place? God made us good. He made us in the garden after in his image and likeness. He made us for communion with one another, communion with him, communion with our environment, communion within ourselves. He ordered all things well, and all things he ordered worked as they were intended. They achieved the purpose for which they were made. But then came that pesky event of disorder that we call original sin. And even the slightest variation in one of those, say for example, one of those eternal pendulums that you might find at the Tellus Museum or somewhere where they've started it, 45 years ago, and it's been going ever since, and there's no variation. The slightest variation in that swing will eventually cause a catastrophic failure. Catastrophic. It just won't work anymore. I mean, you could start it back up. Ultimately, that's what God does in Christ Jesus. But it will not continue on its own as it was intended to do. This is what original sin did to the human condition. We were in perfect harmony in these four relationships. Our relationship with God, our relationship with one another, that is to say, most specifically Adam and Eve, relationship with our environment, the world around us. Adam was set to till and to protect the garden, right? Yeah, the image of Tom Bombadil in Lord of the Rings, which I know nobody's read, it comes to mind where he is this Adam figure who's governing this garden, and he does so by song. He just kind of skips through the garden, singing to the plants, and they all grow. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. Right? And then ultimately, and arguably not most important, but most fundamentally, our relationship with ourselves. That Adam was integral. He was well put together within himself. Adam didn't stand in a mirror and say mean things to himself, right? He was perfectly ordered. These four relationships were catastrophically damaged by the fall. Disobedience. Non servum, I won't serve. Or rather, I should say, I will do as I please. Right? The Lord creates boundaries not for limitations the Lord gives us boundaries not to enslave us, but to give us direction. Because it's only in that direction, only in that definition that we can find true freedom. Right? And so this is how that all of these horrible things, this long list of nasty things that the Lord is saying comes from within a man, out of his heart. That's how that got in there to begin with. Right? But it's not like a substantial thing where to get it out you have to spew it out, you have to pour it out. If that were the case, we'd all be walking around all day long saying mean things to each other, and we'd be emptying that out, and eventually it would be empty and we'd be good again. Right? We don't just spew it out. In fact, that's the wrong thing to do. Right? So how did it get in there? Got in there from sin. How do we get it out? We don't get it out by giving vent to it. We get it out by reordering it. Because the thing itself, unchastity isn't a thing that's there that shouldn't be there. Unchastity is a good thing that's broken. Unchastity is chastity, broken. We want chastity. The vices are nothing but leeches that disrupt and invade and disorder and prevent from operating those wonderful vices that are natural to you and me as human beings. Theft. That's a really pretty thing. I would like to have it, so I'll take it from you. Well, the first part of that's wonderful. It's only the second part, the disordered part, that's the problem. Malice. You've hurt me, I hate you. You've hurt me, I'm angry at you. That's a good thing. That anger turns to malice, that's a bad thing. That's a corrupted thing. So we don't need to get rid of ourselves. Who we are still good. All the things about us, all the things that Jesus names that are bad are actually good things gone bad. So the answer is not to tear those things out of us. It's not to become some horrible stoic or some quietist who does nothing in the world. I'm a wretch. I'm hopeless. I might as well just sit here and try to cause as little harm as possible. That was the servant who hid the coin, right, when the master went away on a long journey. And when he came back, he just dug it up again and said, "Here, master, I didn't think I was good enough to do anything good, so I just buried it and sat on it until you got back. Here it is back." What did he say to him? "You wicked and horrible servant, get out of here." Gross, ew. "You've offended me because you judged yourself differently than I judged you, but I judged you correctly. I judged you competent. I judged you capable. And you said, 'You're wrong. I'm not capable.'" And this is what we do to ourselves all the time. We judge ourselves differently from the way God judges us. We judge ourselves harshly. We judge ourselves dissatisfactorily. We judge ourselves out of a pride that says, "I know better than God." But God instead sees us as his beloved children, just hurt, not wretched, not unredeemable, just hurt. That's all. A little kid that is running down the road and falls and scrapes his knee. That's how God sees us. Not as a blob of muck having been, run over by a car and is completely unfixable. So Jesus calls these things out. He says, these don't belong to you. This brokenness, this disorder does not belong to you. But he's not saying, get rid of yourself, get rid of all of this within you. He's saying, fix it within you. Or rather, he's saying, allow me to fix it within you. And this begins by becoming the new man, by being reborn, reordered, recreated in the waters of baptism. The graces of the sacraments are what reform these things in us. The grace of God does the thing, does the work. But like all things that God does, he delights in the participation, the cooperation of his creatures. And so God doesn't just come up to you and like Benny Hinn or whatever that weirdo's name was and stick his hand on your forehead and go bzzz, and you're fixed. He invites you into a collaboration of work with him, where he's gonna really do the thing, but he wants to see you do it too. He wants you to put a little money where your mouth is. He wants you to put a little effort in, a little skin in the game. And so our response to God's grace is what we would call practicing virtue. Because the virtue contradicts these vices. In fact, I shouldn't say contradicts these vices. The virtue is what comes out of the reordering of these vices when they're ordered correctly. So our practicing virtue, what we call practicing virtue, and disassociating ourselves with vice is really nothing more than taking the vicious tendency in us and practicing the virtue that it's meant to do. It's like hammering a bent piece of metal back into shape. And you can hammer on a bent piece of metal all day long if it's cold. It's not going to do anything. Right? And what is the heat of God but his charity, the fire of God's charity? And so the grace that God gives us through the sacraments heats that metal. It makes us malleable and reformable, so that in cooperating with him to overcome these vices and reorder them in virtue, we are hammering, doing the hard work of control, of self-control and I don't want to say that. Doing the hard thing of self-control, we'll leave it at that, which is the hammering at the metal of our character has been heated up, and it's just as soft as butter. God's grace makes our character as soft as butter if we let it, but we still need to reshape it. We need to do the work of reshaping it according to the model that God gives us in Jesus Christ. This is the man you are supposed to be like. This is how you were meant to be. I have sent him to you so that he can reshape you and you can be like him, so that you can see yourself as I see you, so that you can be loved by me as I love you. You can love me as I invite you to love me, and you can restore communion with one another and within yourself, so that ultimately all things, as Jesus says, all things are made new in him. Right? So understand these things correctly. When we talk about vices, vices aren't their own thing. Vices are a dirty or broken or messed up or bent version of something that is good. We do not need to get rid of vice as a thing itself. We need to reorder the viciousness into its proper shape, that it might be restored to virtue. Sexuality's virtue is chastity. When you bend it, it becomes unchastity. We don't want to get rid of human sexuality. We want to bend it back into the right shape so that it can be virtuous and life-giving. All of the vices need to be understood this way. We bend it back. We let the fire of God's love heat it up so that it's malleable, and then we get in there and do the hard work of practicing the virtue until it's reshaped according to the model of Jesus Christ.